Hi friends, and welcome to my channel. It's already the end of April, which means today's video is my April reading wrap-up. But before we jump into all the books that I read this month, I want to first talk about my goals and what my reading stats ended up being. So the first goal that I set for myself this month was to read 6 books. I have a very specific TBR this month, which was a challenge for me because I am a moody reader, which means I never know what I'm going to feel like reading at any time. But I'm happy to say that I did read all 6 of those books that I had planned. Now this month, most of those were buddy reads, which helped hold myself accountable to finishing them by the end of the month so that I could discuss them with my friends. But in addition to those 6 books, I read 4 others for a total of 10 books. Now that is great, especially because it'll ease off some of the pressure for months that I don't do so well and I could still meet my goal for the end of the year. Another goal that I had planned for myself this month was to read at least 1 classic and 1 self-published book. And not only did I read the 1 classic, but I read 2 self-published. Now I have to say, I don't think self-published books or independent authors are given enough love on BookTube. So I made it a priority to myself, to read more books from independent authors and to share them with you. Actually, my friend Raul from Raul Reads has a Book of the Month club called Howdy Partner, where we read 1 self-published book every month and then have a live discussion of it on his channel. I'll link his channel in the description below, and I'll also put the forum where we share all of our thoughts as we're reading the books. In the month of May, we're going to be reading Hero Forged by Josh Erickson, and I really hope you can join us. I also challenged myself in the month of April to read at least 100 pages per day. And I'm happy to say that I read 4,383 pages for the whole month, which is an average of 146 pages per day. Now, I didn't actually read 100 pages every day, but I'm going to go with the average. I'm very happy with that. That also means that I read 438 pages per book on average, which is really good. In my trusty bullet journal, I track what genres I've read. Of the 10 books that I read, 8 of them were sci-fi fantasy, which is probably right now the genre I read the most. But I also read 1 horror book, which outside of Stephen King is a genre I don't read very much, and 1 contemporary romance. Now let's talk about how I rated the books I read. I know my reading tastes, so my average rating is usually around 4 stars. Which was no different in the month of April. But I did challenge myself in April to read some books I wouldn't normally pick up. And of those, some of them turned out to be great, and some of them turned out to be not that great, in my opinion. So let's see the breakdown. The breakdown of the books that I read were 0 1 stars, 2 2 stars, 1 3 star, 5 4 star, and 2 5 star. And of the 2 5 stars that I read, one of them is my favorite book I've read this year so far. Now that we've talked about my goals and my reading stats, I have to say I think I had a great reading month, and I feel like most of my challenges were a success. But enough of that. Let's talk about all the books I read. The first book that I read in April was Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. This is the second book in the Farseer trilogy, which is the first trilogy of books in the realm of the Elderlings. The second book continues to follow Fitz as he goes from a teenager to an adult. Fitz is actually the bastard son to the heir of the kingdom. He finds this out in the first book, and you continue to follow him as he finds a place that he belongs in his life. I really liked this trilogy, but not as much as the Live Ship Trader trilogy, which comes next. And I give it 4 stars. But I highly recommend that you start with Farseer trilogy. The second book that I read is Naked Sun by Isaac Asimov. This is the second book in his Robot trilogy. It's a sci-fi novel about a detective in a futuristic Earth where he is tasked to solve the murder of a spacer. Although he's been assigned a new partner, and this partner is not quite human. That is actually the summary of the first book, but I don't want to go into any spoilers, so I'll tell you that instead of telling you what Naked Sun is about. I did give this book 4 stars. I really liked it. I look forward to continuing to read more books by Isaac Asimov. The third book that I read in April is Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. I hope I'm saying that right. This book is about a con artist who decides to trick her way into one of the noble houses in order to secure her future and that of her sisters. And that is exactly the words from the back of the book. However, things don't work out the way she had planned. This book is amazing. It has a very interesting magic system. The world is very Venetian-like. The characters are great. It's so much fun to read. There's some darkness to it, but there's also some humor. I gave it 4 stars. I really liked it, and I recommend that you try it as well. The next book that I read in April actually broke my streak of 4-star reads, and that was Neuromancer by William Gibson. This book just wasn't for me. I did try. I got about 54% through before I DNF'd it. It was a buddy read with Steve Talks About Books and Stuff and Raul Reads, and I gave it 2 stars. I'm not going to go into all the things I didn't like about it. Instead, check out the live discussion video that we did. The next book that I read is Aurora Burning by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the second book in their Aurora Cycle series. They are the same authors that wrote Illuminate, which I loved. That trilogy was great. I don't think that this one is as good. It follows a group of young cadets who, before they are even given their first mission, find themselves in a pickle. They are trying to save the life of Aurora, who has actually been in cryosleep for hundreds of years. And they're not really sure why everybody is after her. It's a fun, action-packed YA novel, but it's just not as good as the Illuminate trilogy. I think it's probably because it's written in your standard prose, whereas Illuminate was very unique in that it used media and the points of views were kind of in different formats, and I really liked that. However, I still recommend you read it. It was a lot of fun. It just wasn't as good, and I don't know if that's fair to rate books based on the previous ones, but I gave it 3 stars. Next, I finished The Sword of Kaigen by Emma Wong. This was probably my favorite book of the month. The Sword of Kaigen is a military fantasy, but it's inspired by Japanese culture. It's very unique in the protagonist that it follows. The Sword of Kaigen follows 2 main characters, and one of them is a mother, which, if you all read a lot of fantasy, know that this doesn't happen very often, and it was probably one of the things that I loved most about it. I did give this book 5 stars. There were some things that weren't perfect about it, but my feelings, my entertainment, the themes that were in it were just amazing. It is a self-published book, and I don't think it gets enough love. Please go and check it out and read it yourself. I also read Nocturne in April by H.B. Diaz. This is a short book, about 52 pages, made up of horror stories. It is a group of different kinds of horror tropes. You have ghost stories, monster stories, kind of that creepy crawly suspense filling stories, survivalist stories. They're all very different and all very interesting. I didn't find the writing was really my type. I struggled with it. So I only gave this book 2 stars. However, I have said in previous videos I do intend on rereading it. I think if I read it a little bit differently and kind of spread out the stories over time, there might be some in there that I enjoy way more than I did the first time. After all of the grim, dark, and horror books that I read, I needed a little bit of a change. As a palate cleanser, a friend of mine, Brandy, recommended I read The Hating Game, which is a rom-com, and it's by Sally Thorne. This book was so much fun. It really was exactly what I needed. I found myself laughing several times throughout the book. The banter between the 2 main characters was just so much fun. And of course, my favorite romance trope is enemies to lovers, which is why Pride and Prejudice will always be at the top of my all-time favorite books. So I did give this book 5 stars. I rated it based on how I felt about it compared to other romantic comedy books, and it was just by far one of the best that I've read. I just really, really enjoyed it. A friend of mine, Raul Reads, also read it and gave it 5 stars. Check out his review of it. It was a lot of fun. But I do recommend if you need a palate cleanser or if you really like romance, you should check out that book. Now I want to talk about The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is the 3rd and final book in his First Law trilogy. And I finished it this month, and I'm really excited because this weekend on Sunday we're having a live discussion on the Nerdy Narratives channel. I'll link her channel in the description below. It'll be a whole group of us discussing the trilogy: Steve, Jolene, Raul, Leslie, and a friend of Leslie's named Joanna. I'm really excited and I hope you can join. I really enjoyed this trilogy. The last book I gave 4 stars. It wasn't my favorite of the trilogy, but I do look forward to reading more books by Joe Abercrombie. The last book that I read in April was actually an audiobook by Matt Haig called The Midnight Library. I really like Matt Haig, and his previous books I've listened to on audiobook, so I decided to listen to this one. It's a short audiobook, only 8 hours. It follows a woman named Nora as she finds herself in limbo. Only limbo in this book is a library full of an infinite number of books, each book representing a life that is different based on a single decision. And Nora is given the opportunity to choose any one of these lives that she can live instead of the one that has led her to limbo in the first place. And the book is amazing. It has some great themes in it. It talks about regret in our life, and I really enjoyed it. I did give it 4 stars, and I have no regrets. That's all the books that I read in April. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see a full review on any of the books that I talked about today. Also, let me know what your favorite book was in April. Don't forget to like and subscribe.